Hello fellow gardeners, welcome back to the Humus Heritage channel. If you're watching this, you've probably heard the buzz. Traditional composting is outdated, complicated, and honestly, a waste of time. Just bury your scraps directly in the garden and watch the magic happen, right? Well, let's dig into this trending gardening hack and separate the fact from the fertile fiction. Today, we're exploring one of the most debated alternatives to traditional composting, burying food scraps directly in your garden bed. Stick around as we uncover what actually happens beneath the surface, and whether this method truly deserves the hype it's been receiving. Here's a question that's been circulating through gardening communities with increasing frequency. Is your compost pile gathering dust, while simpler methods beckon from the edges of your garden? Traditional composting has long been the gold standard for soil enrichment. It's been championed by gardeners and agricultural experts for generations. The benefits are undeniable. It transforms kitchen waste and yard debris into a rich, dark amendment that improves soil structure, feeds beneficial organisms, and reduces waste headed to landfills. But let's be honest, there's also a real barrier to entry. Managing a compost pile requires knowledge, effort, and patience. You need to balance green and brown materials in the right ratios, monitor moisture levels, manage temperature, turn the pile regularly, and wait anywhere from several months to over a year for finished compost. That's a substantial time and energy commitment, and not every gardener has the space, physical ability, or inclination to maintain one. Enter the burying scraps concept, a method being presented as a revolutionary alternative that promises to do away with all that fussiness. It's simpler, messier-free, and operates on the principle that nature will do the work for you if you just dig a hole and walk away. For gardeners, tired of the traditional composting grind, this approach has understandable appeal. But before we declare composting obsolete, we need to understand what's actually happening when you bury food waste, and whether this newer trend lives up to its bold claims. The reason burying food scraps has captured the gardening imagination is straightforward. It promises to be effortless. No bins, no structure, no turning, no monitoring. Just dig a hole, drop your scraps, cover them with soil, and move on with your life. The claims circulating through gardening forums and social media are compelling. Advocates insist there's no smell because the materials are underground, away from air exposure. They promise no pest problems because rodents and flies can't reach the buried food. Best of all, they suggest your garden soil will be magically transformed into nutrient-rich fertility, the perfect setup for growing robust plants. This narrative is particularly attractive to busy gardeners, those with limited mobility, or anyone who finds the traditional composting process intimidating. What makes this so appealing is not just the promise of results, but the simplicity of execution. You don't need to research ratios, troubleshoot problems, or invest in bins or materials. The barrier to entry is virtually non-existent. Bury scraps, and the soil becomes richer. It sounds almost too good to be true, which, as you might suspect, should trigger our critical thinking. Another overlooked reality involves uneven decomposition. Buried scraps break down at different rates depending on particle size, moisture, soil contact, and soil temperature. Bones and woody materials might remain largely intact for years, while softer materials disappear relatively quickly. This patchiness means your soil fertility won't improve uniformly, and you might encounter unexpected resistance when digging the same area later. Perhaps most importantly, many gardeners underestimate the pest attraction potential of burying scraps. While it's true that deeply buried materials are less attractive to rodents and flies than surface compost piles, they're not immune to underground visitors. Ants, beetles, and other soil-dwelling organisms will find your buried buffet. In some cases, you might even attract burrowing rodents if materials aren't deep enough. The buried equals protected assumption deserves healthy skepticism, especially in warm climates, where soil fauna is particularly active. Let's talk about what actually works when you're burying scraps and what doesn't. Not all food waste is created equal in this context. Vegetable scraps, fruit peels, tea bags, and coffee grounds bury reasonably well. These materials decompose without major complications. However, meat, fish, dairy, oils, and cooked foods introduce significant problems. While traditional aerobic composting at high heat neutralizes pathogens and prevents most problems, burying these materials creates a slow, cool decomposition environment where harmful bacteria can persist longer. These items also attract pests far more aggressively, and your burial depth needs to be substantial, ideally 12 inches or deeper, to truly protect against determined rodents. Your soil type profoundly influences how successful burying scraps will be. Sandy soils drain quickly and tend to be aerobic even when amended, which is generally favorable for decomposition. Clay soils, however, become anaerobic easily, which slows decomposition and can create conditions where unpleasant smells develop. In wet climates, burying scraps becomes riskier because soil saturation encourages anaerobic decomposition and pest problems. Conversely, in arid climates, buried materials might decompose so slowly that they feel almost ineffective. Climate also plays a role that many gardeners overlook. In cool climates or during winter, decomposition slows dramatically. If you're burying scraps in November in a northern region, you might not see meaningful decomposition until spring or even summer of the following year. This timing consideration is crucial for planning when and where you bury materials relative to when you want to plant in that location. For those committed to burying scraps despite these realities, there are practical strategies to minimize downsides. First, bury materials at least 12 inches deep and at least 12 inches away from where you plan to grow vegetables in the near term. Second, focus on burying in areas where you're growing heavy feeders like corn, squash, or tomatoes, plants that will benefit from the slow nutrient release as they grow. Here's the truth that the compost is dead narrative misses. Burying scraps isn't inherently superior to traditional composting, nor is it useless. It's a different tool suited to different circumstances. Traditional composting remains unbeaten for processing large volumes of material quickly, killing weed seeds and pathogens through heat, and producing a portable amendment you can use anywhere. Burying scraps excels at reducing labor, avoiding pests in a controlled manner, and enriching specific garden beds over time. The most effective approach for most gardeners is actually a hybrid one. Maintain a traditional compost system for most of your organic waste while strategically burying certain materials in specific locations. Use burying for vegetable scraps in areas you're preparing for heavy feeders. Use composting for everything else. This dual-method approach leverages the strengths of both systems while minimizing their weaknesses. The garden community doesn't have to choose between these methods, we can use both. Burying scraps is a legitimate low-labor soil-building strategy, particularly valuable for fall and winter, for unused beds you're quietly preparing for future seasons, or for creating localized nutrient zones. But it's not a universal composting killer, and claiming it replaces traditional composting outright oversimplifies the nuances of soil health and decomposition. Your specific gardening situation, your climate, soil type, space, physical ability, and gardening goals should determine which method works best for you. Armed with this understanding of how burying actually works and what it can and cannot do, you're equipped to make an informed decision that serves your garden's real needs. Thank you so much for joining us on the Humus Heritage channel today. If this deep dive into soil science and practical gardening helped you understand the truth behind burying scraps, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss our next episode. Share this video with a fellow gardener who's been wondering about this trend. I'm sure they'll appreciate the clarity. Head to the comments section and tell us, are you a traditional composter, a scrap burrier, or a hybrid gardener? We'd love to hear about your experience. Keep building that beautiful living soil, and we'll see you in the next one. Happy gardening!